Judges 20 verse 1 to 21:25, the intertribal war. As we have shown earlier, Judges 21 to 21 to 25 is a fallout from the story of the Levite and his concubine in Judges 19, which begins with a fractured relationship between a man and a woman, leading to the woman's brutal murder, and then broadens to intertribal conflict and the near extermination of an entire Israelite tribe. As in Judges 17 to 18, there is a parody of divine war in Judges 20 to 21. In chapter 17 to 18, this war is directed against outsiders, but in chapters 19 to 21, it is directed against an Israelite tribe itself. In both sections, actions are attributed to Yahweh and are purportedly made for Yahweh. But Yahweh remains detached, never initiates action, and responds when called upon in a distant and uninvolved way. So O'Connell, in Rhetoric of Judges, identifies three plot levels in chapters 19 to 21. So last week we discussed the recovery of the Levite's concubine, and then this is followed by the judgment against Gibeah and the Benjamites, and then finally the attempt to restore the remnant of Benjamin. These different plot levels overlap with each other so that the resolution of the first becomes the inciting incident for the second, and the second for the third. The first and third incidents, the recovery of the Levite's concubine and then the attempt to restore the remnant of Benjamin, correspond in that the ravishment of the concubine in chapter 19 mirrors the handing over of the women of Jabesh Gilead and the abduction of the women of Shiloh to provide wives for the Benjaminites in chapter 21. Women in these incidents become pawns, ironically serving both as a rallying point to destroy an Israelite tribe, as well as sort of a breeding cattle to rebuild the same tribe. As Mark Biddle, reading Judges, says, episodes in this comedy of horrors unfold in a grotesque downward arc that begins with marital strife and ends with captive brides, including along the way betrayal, rape, murder, and the near eradication of an Israelite tribe. The thing that is features in the chapters 20 to 21 is the tribal assembly, which are the 11 tribes together. And for the first time, the book of Judges, all the tribes of Israel except for Benjamin come together as one. They're now united. In the biblical story, the last time the tribes came together was during the covenant renewal ceremony before Joshua's death, in which Israel pledged to serve and obey Yahweh. After the covenant renewal ceremony, the tribes went to claim their respective territories. And you can see that in Joshua 24:28 and also in Judges 2:6. So even though the 12 tribes no longer acted as a whole, some tribes still help each other in claiming their particular territories, as you can see in Judges 1. However, as the book of Judges progresses, Israel falls repeatedly into apostasy. Along with their increasing alienation from Yahweh, the tribes' relationship with each other also deteriorates. So, if you remember, not all the tribes responded to Deborah and Barak's call to battle. And in the Gideon and Jephthah narrative, cooperation was replaced with competition, infighting, and killing. In the Samson narrative, there was outright betrayal, as Samson was handed over to the oppressors by the Judahites. You know, it's from another tribe, but also a fellow Israelite. Thus, the inhospitality and hostility of the Gibeonites against those who come from another tribe is but the climax of the increasing fragmented relationship and animosity of the tribes against each other. Hence, the report of the tribes holding an assembly in Mizpah, one of Israel's sacred sites, seems to signal a positive change. At last, Israel is acting in unity. As the phrases, all Israel, they came together as one, show. The assembly has a religious character, as can be seen in the use of kahal, which means to assemble or assembly, in verse 1 and 2, and Eidah, which is the Hebrew for congregation. Now, while both words can have a general meaning that refers to any gathering, the context indicates the usage of the technical sense of Israel gathering as a legal and cultic community. So this is a religious gathering. In the NIV, it says that Israel assembled before the Lord, clearly indicating that the gathering has a sacral character. However, the underlying Hebrew phrase used here is not lifnei Yahweh, which means in the face of Yahweh, which is actually the Hebrew phrase used for the translation before the Lord. The Hebrew phrase used here is El Yahweh, which is not used frequently. So whenever they want to, whenever Israel gathers in the presence of Yahweh in order to seek God's approval, favor, or perspective, they use the term lifnei Yahweh, before Yahweh. But here, it's just a gathering to the Lord rather than before the Lord, even though some English translations will still translate it as before the Lord. So in addition, the leaders of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, which is the translation in NRSV, rather than presenting themselves before God or before the Lord. So there's this word, the assembly. They presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God. It's not, they presented themselves before the Lord. Now, these subtle shifts in phrasing suggest that the gathering may not have been for the purpose of seeking God's guidance or help in the present crisis, although the Israelite tribes may have believed that they are really gathering for the sake of God. Now, one thing that is notable in this gathering is that Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, is totally excluded. So the assembly is religious, but the gathering is for war. The 4,000 men who assembled are armed with swords, as you can see in verse 2. Despite the rhetoric of all Israel acting as one, Benjamin is excluded from the assembly and only heard about it, as you can see in verse 3. The gathering, it turns out, is actually a trial to confirm the guilt of Benjamin without the tribe being represented. So the trial begins with a testimony from the aggrieved party, the Levite, whose actions in sending out his concubine's body parts triggered the gathering. Now, this action of sending out body parts was actually a call for war. But usually what you do is you hack the animal and then send it into the different tribes. But here, the one used and the one hacked into pieces was actually the body of the murdered woman. Now, from the point of view of the assembly, the Levite is the husband of the murdered woman in verse 4, and therefore has all the rights to seek retribution. But while the accuser is able to give his version of the story, the defendant, the tribe or the people of Gibeah, they were not present. There is nobody from Gibeah, and there is only one witness instead of 2 or 3 witnesses required in a trial. As a result, there is no way of checking the consistency and truthfulness of the Levite story. We have already noted how the Levite's version diverges from the narrator's account in 19:20 to 28, and his challenge to the tribe to take action. But as you can see, it was not the full version as narrated by the narrator. There were some parts that were omitted, particularly the Levite's responsibility in the whole thing. And yet, on the basis of the Levites' word, they were all ready to go to war against Gibeah. And so, the stage then is set for war. The stage is set for war, 28 to 13. So the assembly, without further investigation, believes the Levites' account. They immediately make plans and strategize to attack Gibeah with no benefit of discussion and time to ponder the next step. More significantly, there is no record of prayer or seeking God's guidance. It is an assembly for God, but strangely, the main player is out of the picture in terms of crafting out a response to the grave situation before them. There is no doubt that the tribal leaders are zealous. They come in battle gear and even commit themselves not to return home until they have punished Gibeah for its crime, while sending some home to get provisions for the army. But not only are they zealous, they are all united as one. In verse 11, in their resolve to give to Gibeah of Benjamin what they deserve for this outrageous act, which is a quote from verse 10. The reference to the Gibeah of Benjamin extends the responsibility not only to Gibeah, but to the whole tribe in which the city belongs. Hence, it is throughout the tribe of Benjamin and not to the inhabitants of Gibeah that the message is sent, to turn those wicked men of Gibeah over to the joint tribes so that they might render judgment of capital punishment. The message makes reference to the evil or the crime that was committed in Gibeah, which in turn has caused evil, this is a play of words on Ra'ah, on Israel. Only by putting to death the perpetrators of the crime can this evil be purged, in verses 12 to 13. The tribe of Benjamin, however, refuses the demand of the tribes, and thus the stage is set for battle among Israelites, fellow sharers of the same covenant, whose God is Yahweh. Could the war have been prevented? There is no doubt that Benjamin's recalcitrance is a major factor in the ensuing war. But are the rest of the tribes innocent? First of all, nobody from Gibeah or even a representative from Benjamin was present in the trial. Yet a decision was made without the accused or other witnesses. Second, the tribes came ready for war even before the trial, so that it appears that Gibeah is judged guilty without a hearing. The message that was sent implies the guilt of the whole tribe. So in verse 12, it says, "What about this awful crime that has been committed among you?" Third, there is no attempt to renegotiate after Benjamin's refusal or even to hear out the reasons for their refusal. Thus, with both sides locked in their positions, war is inevitable.